Never outshine the master. Judgment. Always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to please and impress them, do not go too far in your displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite. Inspire fear and insecurity. Make your master appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power. Transgression of the law. Nicolas Fouquet, Louis XV's finance minister, in the first year of his reign, was a generous man who loved lavish parties, pretty women, and poetry. He also loved money, for he led an extravagant lifestyle. Fouquet was clever and very indispensable to the king. So when the prime minister, Jules Mazarin, died in 1661, the finance minister expected to be named the successor. Instead, the king decided to abolish the position. This and other signs made Fouquet suspect that he was falling out of favor. And so he decided to ingratiate himself with the king by staging the most spectacular party the world had ever seen. The party's ostensible purpose would be to commemorate the completion of Fouquet's Chateau Volucom. But its real function was to pay tribute to the king, the guest of honor. The most brilliant nobility of Europe and some of the greatest minds of the time, La Fontaine, La Rochefoucauld, Madame de Vignes, attended the party. Molière wrote a play for the occasion in which he himself was to perform at the evening conclusion. The party began with a lavish 7-course dinner featuring foods from the Orient, never before tasted in France, as well as new dishes created especially for the night. The meal was accompanied with much commissioned by Fouquet to honor the king. After the dinner, there was a promenade through the chateau gardens. The grounds of fountains of Vaux de Côte were to be inspiration for Vasselais. Fouquet, personally accompanied by the young king through the geometrically aligned arrangement of shrubbery and flower bed. Arrived at the garden canals, they witnessed a fireworks display, which was followed by the performance of Mallarmé's plays. The party ran well into the night, and everyone agreed it was the most amazing affair they had ever attended. The next day, Fouquet was arrested by the king's head musketeers, Darnay. 3 months later, he went on trial for stealing from the country's treasury. Actually, most of the stealing he was accused of, he had done on the king's behalf and with the king's permission. Fouquet was found guilty and sent to the most isolated prison in France, high in the Pyrenees Mountains, where he spent the last 20 years of his life in solitary confinement. Interpretation. Louis XV, the Sun King, was a proud and arrogant man who wanted to be the center of attention at all times. He could not countenance being outdone in lavishness by anyone, and certainly not the finance minister, to succeed Fouquet. Louis chose Jean-Baptiste Colbert, a man famous for his parsimony and for giving the dullest parties in Paris. Colbert made sure that any money liberated from the treasury went straight to Louis's hand. With the money, Louis built a place even more magnificent than Fouquet's, the glorious place of Versailles. He used the same architect, decorators, and garden designer. At Versailles, Louis hosted parties even more extravagant than the one that caused Fouquet's his freedom. Let us examine the situation. The evening of the party, as Fouquet presented spectacle on spectacle to Louis, each more magnificent than the one before, he imagined the affair as demonstrating his loyalty and devotion to the king. Not only did he think the party would put him back in the king's favor, he thought it would show his good taste, his connections, and his popularity, making him indispensable to the king and demonstrating that he would make an excellent prime minister. Instead, however, each spectacle and appreciative smile bestowed by the guest of Fouquet made it simple to the Louis that his own friends, subjects, were more charmed by the finance minister than by the king himself, and that Fouquet was actually flaunting his wealth and power rather than flattering Louis XV. Fouquet's elaborate party offended the king's vanity. Louis would not admit this to anyone, of course. Instead, he found a convenient excuse to rid himself of a man who had inadvertently made him feel insecure. Such is the fate in some form or another of all those who unbalance the master's sense of self, poke holes in his vanity, or make him doubt his prominence. When the evening began, Fouquet was the top of the world. By the time it has ended, he was at the bottom. Voltaire, 1694 to 1778. Observation of the law. In the early 1600s, the Italian astronomer mathematician Galileo found himself in a precarious position. He depended on the generosity of great rulers to support his research, and so, like Renaissance scientists, he would sometimes make gifts of his inventions and discoveries to leading patrons of the time. Once, for instance, he presented a military compass he had invented to the Duke of Gonzaga. Then he dedicated a book explaining the use of compass to the mediocres. Both rulers were grateful, and through them, Galileo was able to find more students to teach. No matter how great the discovery, however, his patrons usually paid him with gifts and cash. With gifts, not cash. This made for a life of consistent insecurities and dependence. There must be an easier way, he thought. Galileo hit on a new strategy in 1610 when he discovered the moons of Jupiter. Instead of dividing the discovery among his patrons, given one telescope, he had used dedicating a book to another, and so on. As he had done in the past, he decided to focus extremely on this minicrisis. He chose minicrisis for one reason. Shortly after Cosimo I had established the Medici dynasty in 1540. He had made Jupiter the mightiest of the gods and Medici symbol, a symbol of power that went beyond politics and banking, one link to ancient Rome and its divinities. Galileo turned his discovery of Jupiter's moons into a cosmic event. Honoring the Medica's greatness, shortly after the discovery, he announced that the bright stars, the moon of Jupiter, offered themselves in the heavens to his telescope at the same time as Cosmos II enthronement. He said that the number of the moons, 4, harmonized with the number of the Medes. Cosmos II had 3 brothers, and the moons orbited Jupiter as these 4 suns revolving around Cosmos. The dynasty founder. More than coincidence, this showed that heavens themselves reflected the ascendancy of the Medici family. After he decided the discovery to the Medici, Galileo commissioned an emblem representing Jupiter sitting on a cloud with the 4 stars circling about him, and presented this Cosmo II as a symbol of his link to the stars. In 1610, Cosmo II made Galileo his official court philosopher and mathematician with a full salary. For a scientist, this was a coup of a lifetime. This days of begging for patronage was over. Interpretation. In one stroke, Galileo gained more with his new strategy than he had in years of begging. The reason is simple. All masters want to appear more brilliant than other people. They do not care about science or empirical truth or the latest invention. They care about their name and their glory. Galileo gave the Medicis infinity more glory by linking their name to cosmic force than he had by making them the patrons of some new scientific gadget or discovery. Scientists are not spared the vagaries of court life and patronage. They too must serve masters who hold the purse strings, and their great intellectual powers can make the master feel secure, as if he were there to supply the funds. An ugly, ignoble job. The producer of a great work wants to feel he is more than just the provider of the financing. He wants to appear creative and powerful, and also more important than the work produced in his name. Instead of insecurity, you must give him glory. Galileo did not challenge the intellectual authority of Medici with his discovery or make them feel inferior in any way. By literally aligning them with the stars, he made them shine brilliantly among the court of Italy. He also did not outshine the master. He made the master outshine all others. Key to power. Everyone has insecurities. When you show yourself in the world and display your talents naturally, stir up all kinds of resentment, envy, and other manifestations of insecurity. This is to be expected. You cannot spend your life worrying about the petty feelings of others. With those above you, however, you must take a different approach. When it comes to power, outshining the master is perhaps the worst mistake of all. Do not fool yourself into thinking that life has changed much since the days of Louis XV and Medici. Those who obtain high standing in life are like kings and queens. They want to feel secure in their position, superior to those around them in intelligence, wit, and charm. It is deadly but common misperception to believe that by displaying and vaunting your gifts and talents, you are winning the master's affection. He may rain appreciation, but at his first opportunity, he will replace you with someone less intelligent, less attractive, less threatening, just as Louis XV replaced the sparkling Fouquet with the bland Colbert. And as with Louis, he will not admit the truth, but will find an excuse to rid himself of your presence. This law involves two rules that you must realize. First, you can inadvertently outshine a master simply by being yourself. There are masters who are more insecure than others. Monstrously insecure, you may naturally outshine them by your charm and your grace. No one has more natural talents than a star Manfredi, Prince of Faenza, the most handsome of all young princes of Italy. He captivated his subject with his generosity and open spirit. In the 1500s, Caesar Borgia laid siege to Faenza. When the city surrendered, the citizens expected the worst from the cruel Borgia, who, however, decided to spare the town. He simply occupied his fortress, executed none of its citizens, and allowed Prince Manfredi, 18 at the time, to remain with his court in complete freedom. A few weeks later, though, soldiers hauled Astor Manfredi away to a Roman prison. A year after that, his body was fished out of the river Tiber, a stone tied around his neck. Borgia justified the horrible deed with some sort of trumped-up charge of treason and conspiracy. But the real problem was he was notoriously vain and insecure. The young man was outshining him without even trying. Given Manfredi's natural talents, the prince's mere presence made Borgia seem less attractive, charismatic. The lesson is simple. If you cannot help being charming and superior, you must learn to avoid such monsters of vanity. Either that or find a way to mute your good qualities in the company of Caesar Borgia. Second, never imagine that because the master loves you, you can do anything you want. Entire books can be written about favorites who fell out of favor by taking their status for granted. For daring to outshine In late 16th century Japan, the favorite of Emperor Hideyoshi was a man called Sen no Rikyu. The premier artist of the tea ceremony, which had become an obsession with the nobility, he was one of the Hideyoshi's most trusted advisors, had his own apartment in a palace, and was honored throughout Japan. Yet, in 1591, Hideyoshi had himself arrested and sentenced to death. Hideyoshi took his own life instead. The cause for his sudden change of fortune was discovered later. It seems Rikyu, former peasant and later court favorite, had a wooden statue made of himself wearing sandals, a sign of nobility, and posing loftily. He had his statue placed in the most important temple inside of the palace gates in clear sight of royalty, who often would pass by. The Hanyoshi then signified that Rico had no sense of limits, presuming that he had the same rights as those of highest nobility. He had forgotten that his position depended on the emperor and had come to believe that he had earned his own place. This was an unforgivable miscalculation of his importance, and he paid for it with his life. Remember the following. Never take your position for granted and never take your position for granted and never let any favors you receive to go to your head. Knowing the dangers of outshining your master, you can turn this law to your advantage. First, you must flatter and puff up your master. Overt flattery can be effective, but has its limits. It is too direct and obvious and looks bad to the courtiers. Discreet flattery is much more powerful. If you are more intelligent than your masters, for example, seem the opposite. Make him appear more intelligent than you. Act naive. Make it seem that you need his expertise. Commit harmless mistakes that will not hurt you in the long run, but will give you the chance to ask him for help. Masters adore such requests. A master who cannot bestow on you the gift of his experience may direct recoil and ill will at you instead. If your ideas are more creative than your master's, ascribe them to him in a public manner as possible. Make it clear that your advice is merely an echo of his advice. If you surpass your master in wit, it is okay to play the role of court jester, but do not make him appear cold and surly by comparison. Tone down your humor if necessary, and find ways to make him seem the disper of amusement and good cheer. If you are naturally more sociable and generous than your master, be careful not to be the cloud that blocks his radiance from others. He must appear as the sun around which everyone revolves, radiating power and brilliance, the sun of attention. If you are thrust into the position of entertaining him, a display of your limit may win his sympathy. Any attempt to impress him with your grace and generosity can prove fatal. Learn from Fouquet or pay the price. In all these cases, it is a weakness to disguise your strength if, in the end, they lead to power. By letting others outshine you, you remain in control of being a victim of their insecurity. This will all come in handy by the day you decide to rise above your inferior status. If, like Galileo, you can make your master shine even more in the eyes of others, then you are a godsend and you will be instantly promoted. Imagine the stars in the sky, therefore, can be the only one sun at a time. Never obscure the sunlight or rival the sun's brilliance. Rather, fade into the sky and find ways to heighten the master star intensely. Authority. Avoid outshining the master. All superiority is odious, but the superiority of a subject over his prince is not only stupid, it is fatal. This is a lesson that the stars in the sky teach us that may be related to the sun as just as brilliant, but they never appear in her company. Baltasar Gracian, 1601 to 1658. Reversal. You cannot worry about upsetting everyone you come across, but you must be selectively cruel. If your superior is a falling star, there is nothing to fear from outshining him. Do not be merciful. Your master has no such scruples in his own cold-blooded climb to the top. Gauge his strength. If he is weak, discreetly hasten his downfall. Outdo, outcharm, outsmart him at key points, key moments. If he is very weak and ready to fall, let nature take its course. Do not risk outshining a feeble superior. It might appear cruel and spiteful. But if your master is firm in his position, yet you know yourself to be more capable, bid your time and be patient. It is the nature of course, things that power eventually fades and weakens. Your master will fall someday, and if you play it right, you will outlive and someday outshine him.